Hey, everybody, welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. Before we start the episode this week, I just want to mention something. This is our 99th episode, and that's pretty cool for me. I just never thought I'd get this far for a variety of reasons. But this is episode 99, and, kind of getting back on track with getting some guests on the show. I've been feeling better. I had that cough, that lingering cough for just so long. And last week I had Andrew Razowitz on the show, and we talked about close encounters of the fifth kind and alien contact and UFOs over Brooklyn, and really cool show. And if you're listening to this on the day this premieres on Friday the 31st, if you tune in at 8 p.m. on Andrew's channel, you can find me there live. I'll be talking to Andrew again on his show. So very cool. He was just such an awesome guest, and we had such a blast talking. Um, and so we decided to do it some more. So hopefully he will come on my show again as well, and we can do this exchange. And because I know he's got a lot more to talk about. I have a lot of things to talk about. So very cool guest. Next week for our 100th episode, I have a special treat for you guys, an awesome guest. If you are interested in Bigfoot, and if you're watching this video, I am assuming that you are into Bigfoot. If you like the Adirondacks, if you like first-hand accounts of Bigfoot encounters, I have one of the best on next week, Brian Gosselin, and actually interviewed him earlier this week. And just such a nice guy, awesome story, awesome storyteller. We talked for almost 2 hours, so it's going to be a supersized episode for our 100th. Great, great interview with him, mainly because he did all the talking. But he's just I could listen to him for hours, and just such a gracious guest and a generous guy and just smart. And he's got this wonderful experience, and it's never changed. And he tells it firsthand, and he had this experience back in 1976 up in Whitehall, New York. So again, anyone interested in Bigfoot knows about Whitehall, and Small Town Monsters did The Beast of Whitehall. So very famous account in the annals of Bigfoot lore. So he'll be on next week. It's a great show, so don't miss it. But speaking of Bigfoot, let us get this week to some Bigfoot stories from New Jersey. Okay, so this week I'm choosing to do some Bigfoot stories from Burlington County in New Jersey. And if you're looking at the map here, here's Staten Island, this blue dot. That's about where I am. And if you come down here, so kind of like east northeast of Philadelphia is Burlington County. And it's a large county. This is kind of the northern part of the county. It stretches way down south here to like Wharton State Forest. And I picked Burlington County this week because a few weeks ago, the lovely Rebecca and I went to a Ren Fair at the Burlington County Fairgrounds, which you'll see on the map here. And anytime I go to these places kind of out of my normal zone here of Staten Island or Brooklyn, I tend to look up the local history afterwards because we were out there, and it's a fairground, so it's fairly flat land and open, but all around us you can kind of see woods. So it just made me wonder, are there any Bigfoot sightings there? So I bumbled over to the BFRO website, and Burlington County has like 15 sightings listed there. So I picked a few to talk about this week, and I will talk about those. I also believe our intro music and outro music musicians, the band Riversend, they are from Burlington County, I believe, or near Burlington County. So Olivia, Zach, if you guys are listening, this is for you as well. But yeah, I just picked this because we were at the Ren Fair. We had a really good time. New Jersey Ren Fair. I don't know how much longer it's going on. I think it only goes for like 3 or 4 weeks, so it might be wrapping up soon. But it was a cool little fair. We went. We had a great time. Only about an hour away from us, so it was nice to just be able to do something in a day like that. But I figured I would check out some Burlington County Sasquatch sightings, and there are some good ones here. So let's get started tonight. All right. So most of these stories that I picked are fairly long. So I don't know how many I'm going to do tonight. We'll see how much time I have and how long my voice holds out for, because this is one of the episodes where, as someone I know teases me about, I just talk to myself about things that don't exist. So just me talking. So we'll see how long my voice holds out. But this first story is from the year 2019. This is from Burlington County, August 12th, 2019. Submitted by witness Mike, and this is a motorist spots juvenile Sasquatch near Speedwell entrance to Franklin Parker Preserve. So again, so this was submitted in August. I'm sorry. This took place in June. So he submitted it pretty quickly. June 20th, New Jersey. Location details: Franklin Parker Preserve, Speedwell entrance. This all took place within a couple hundred yards of the parking area and gate. So that's interesting. Nearest town is Chatsworth. Nearest road, Route 563. And I will talk about his narrative here. So observed. On June 20th at approximately 6:40 p.m., I was traveling on Route 563 south of Chatsworth near the Franklin Parker Preserve Speedwell entrance. I was looking to see what the parking situation was there for a future hike, so my eyes were on the right side of the road when out of the periphery, I saw what I thought was a groundhog on the left. It was very large, and I realized that it would have to be a huge groundhog, so I looked fully to the left and saw an approximate 3 to 3.5 foot tall creature stand up on two legs as I passed by. I did not get a good look at the face, and I almost continued, but I decided to turn around about 150 yards up on a dirt road that's on the right. I pulled in and turned around and headed back to the location. There is a bend in the road there. It bends around to the right on the way back as I made it past the bend. Approximately 30 yards in front of me, the creature was still there. It was now fully turned towards me, and I could see that it looked like a cross between Curious George and the character Chaka from The Land of the Lost. Its face and hands, as well as the tops of its feet, were hairless and a light tan in color. The fur was covered with a golden brown, a little darker than a golden retriever, very much like the color of a groundhog. I could not see the nose. When I locked eyes with it, I could not see the whites, just big dark brown eyes. It stood there for a second or two when I rounded the bend and then took off running into the swampy area. It ducked behind a short bush, and when I drove past it, I could no longer see it. I turned the car around again, and when I went by again, it was gone. I waited there a bit to see if I could see anything moving in the field. I couldn't, so I took off. It was a couple of days before I shared the experience with my family and friends. In that period of time, I thought for sure someone was going to report a missing kid in a Halloween costume. When the thing took off running, it was fast. I would describe it as the fastest kid on the 10 to 12 baseball team. We had really bad storms that night, and my commute was a disaster. It poured all through that area, and I thought it was odd that the thing I saw appeared to be dry. At least the fur was. Also noticed there were lots of bad downpours and storms, nothing else unusual. It was just him looking for a particular landmark on the other side of the road. He's not aware of any other stories. Time was about 6:40 p.m. Environment, pine forest, swamp. So a lot of these stories take place in the Pine Barrens, which is a huge swath of wilderness in New Jersey, and it's full of pine trees and swamps, and a very spooky area. So I'll read the follow-up here, and then I'll give some of my thoughts. So this is the follow-up is done by BFRO investigator Eric Spinner, and he says, I conducted a 45-minute phone interview with Mike, and he restated the events of June 20th as reported above. He was also able to provide me with some additional information regarding the events leading up to his encounter and also following it. We made plans to meet at the location in order to do a full recreation of the encounter and to learn more details. Fellow New Jersey BFRO investigators Art Mack and Heather Passetti joined me with the recreation on site, and Mike was waiting for us when we arrived. After introductions, I hopped into Mike's SUV and we began the recreation. I had my GoPro on the dashboard and my H2N digital recorder going and maintained radio contact with Art and Heather. We did one pass with the vehicle and determined that Heather needed to be a bit closer to the side of the road on the return portion, so we proceeded to do a second pass. Initially, when Mike was driving down the road, he was looking to the right and caught a glimpse of what he thought was a groundhog, but then turned his head to look left just as the individual stood up. His immediate thought was, that's one huge groundhog. Then as he kept driving, he began questioning what it was and battled with the decision to turn around or to keep going. He decided to use the next available spot to turn around, and after checking that no oncoming cars were approaching, he headed back to where he spotted it. He rounded the bend, and about 70 yards ahead of him was the juvenile Bigfoot standing on the side of the road facing him. When he got to about 35 yards away, he locked eyes with it and was able to see only dark brown eyes, no whites of the eyes, and that's when it turned and took off running in the direction of the swamp. He slowed his vehicle to almost a stop by where it was standing only moments before and saw it go behind some bushes. He then turned his vehicle around again and pulled up to the parking area on the right and stopped. He waited a few minutes but could no longer see it, so he left. After we did the recreation, we took measurements of the individual's height and shoulder width and determined that it was closer to 4 feet tall and about 18 inches across the shoulders and chest. He described the arms as thin, the chest not overly developed, and the legs were stockier, more muscular. He also confirmed that the hair was more auburn in color and about 3 to 4 inches in length. He mentioned how we had severe storms move through the area that evening and how they were moving in an easterly direction as to hamper his commute from work. He was surprised to see that the fur appeared to be dry, but somewhat matted. I found Mike to be a credible witness, and he was very clear with his reporting of events. He previously had not been into the Bigfoot phenomenon and had not even seen an episode of Finding Bigfoot. He really thought he would hear that some kid in a Halloween costume went missing in the area, but after a few days without seeing any reports of one, he realized that he had seen a juvenile Bigfoot, a rare sight to see indeed, and meeting with us helped to validate his experience. The area where this occurred is a former cranberry bogland that has now been preserved by the state for recreational use. It is rich in flora and fauna and has numerous lakes and streams. It's an area that I've conducted research in for over the past decade, and I recorded my first wood knocks and found my first juvenile track impressions nearby. We stayed after Mike left and conducted further research near the location. Research? We used a Phantom 4 drone to conduct aerial surveillance of the area as well as thermal imagery. We were able to elicit responses from coyotes and barred owls and also recorded some higher pitched screams that may have been a fox or even maybe a Sasquatch. So again, here's the map. It kind of shows you. So this is pretty far south of where we were at our Ren Fair, south of Toms River, north of Atlantic City. And there's some maps here. Again, as always, I'm going to link to all of this in the description below. But this is one of those types of sightings I really like. Again, if he had seen this thing and then kept driving and didn't go back and didn't get a better look at it, I would say it was probably a bear. You know, it was short. He thought it was a groundhog. It stands up and, you know, takes a few steps or whatever. And then he doesn't see anything else, you know? So at that point, not that it would definitely have been a bear, but you'd have to kind of just debunk it as a bear and say he didn't get a good look at it. Probably a bear. Move on. You know, not really a great story. But he turns around, goes back and sees it again, makes eye contact with it. The interesting thing, well, one of the interesting things, he says it looked like Chaka from Land of the Lost. And I grew up watching Land of the Lost, and Chaka was part of this race of almost like Bigfoot, proto-human, just hairy humanoid people. You know, they were just this tribe of people. And there were a few other ones, and they used to bully Chaka. And, you know, but Chaka was like a juvenile. He was just, you know, a kid, basically, a child Bigfoot. But he had the brow, and, you know, he was just hairy and kind of very Bigfooty. And I'll post pictures here just so you guys can see what I'm talking about if you're not from my generation. I think it's interesting he mentions the eyes. Like, he made eye contact with it, and something you see a lot in primates. You know, in humans, you can see the whites of people's eyes. And in primates, if you think about an ape or a chimp, most of the times you're not seeing the whites or much of the whites. You just see big, dark brown eyes. So this sounds ape-like almost. And again, you're talking about somebody who's getting a good look at this. He's seeing this creature. It's standing up. It runs off into the woods. It's all bipedal. Clearly not a bear. Again, if he didn't turn back around and get the second better look, I would have dismissed this as probably being a bear. But he gets a good look this time. He looks it right in the eyes. He's getting a good look at this. He knows it's not a bear. So, you know, very interesting. And he also says he wasn't into Bigfoot. So he's not got Bigfoot on the brain. I mean, some people go into the woods and just every branch on a tree that's broken and every weird indent in the ground and everything is Bigfoot. That's Bigfoot. And that is Bigfoot. And Bigfoot did this. And he didn't have Bigfoot on the brain. He even says he thought maybe there was a missing kid in a Halloween costume. He thought this was a kid in a costume that he had seen. And it wasn't until a few days later he started realizing maybe this was Bigfoot. So this is the type of story I really like because, again, it's either A or B. There's really no middle ground here. It's either this guy is completely lying about what he saw, wasting other people's time, you know, from the BFRO to come out and investigate and do this recreation, or he saw something that we can't explain. He saw something he can't explain. It clearly wasn't a bear. So either he's lying or it was Bigfoot. Again, a lot of these stories, you hear the tree knocks, you hear the howls, you get a fleeting glimpse. You could say it could be a number of other things in between Bigfoot or complete outright lie / hoax. It could be the bear. It could be a moose. It could be a man in a costume, a man in a ghillie suit, like a misidentification of another sort. Like, there's a lot of other possibilities. A case like this, he's either seeing Bigfoot or he's lying. And again, I don't think people lie like this. Again, where's the payoff for hoaxing? He's not on TV. He's not getting paid for this. he wasted his time, I mean, typing this out and then meeting with the investigators and recreating his encounter. It's just a lot of work to go through to just pull a prank on people and then for no payoff. So stories like this, I really like. I like this story because he got a really good look at it. So very interesting. And we will move on to the next story. All right. So for our second story, this is a Class B. So this is not as good of a witness encounter as far as a visual confirmation. But this is a government-connected snake researcher describes daytime encounter in the Pine Barrens swamps. So again, the Pine Barrens, big swath of wilderness area, very creepy. I've been down there. Cool area, but Jersey Devil, all those legends, but lots of alleged Bigfoot sightings down there as well. So let's get into this one. This is from June 16th of 2018, New Jersey, Burlington County. Location details. To get to the exact location, you would need to have mud boots, for the area around the ridge where the incident took place is surrounded by thick wetlands, swamps that are almost impenetrable aside from a few paths and game trails. Nearest town is Shamong. Nearest road is 206. And before I get into this, I like that he mentions where this is, because so many skeptics are going to say, oh, it's a hoaxer, it's a man in a suit. A lot of these encounters happen in places that are just so hard to get to, so much work. I don't know why someone would go back there and dress up as Bigfoot to scare somebody. You may never even encounter somebody back there. It's a lot of work. And worst case scenario, you're getting shot because someone thinks you're a bear or Bigfoot, and they're going to try to bring you in. So this is a tricky location to get to. This isn't just a roadside crossing or something that would be easy. This one just doesn't seem as easy to hoax. So let's get into his narrative here. So observed. Have been out scouting research locations for snake studies on Google Earth and found an area that we really wanted to check out, which was an open paleodune ridge that offered plenty of basking/nesting habitat that the snakes we were researching liked to use. The hike there was pretty rough, walking through knee-deep wetlands at points and wrestling with tangles of greenbrier and other thorny bushes to get to the location, which was about 1.5 miles back into the woods. So again, this is not an easy place to get to. Upon finally arriving at the site, we were able to settle down and start looking for good spots that the snakes we were looking for used. As we were walking up one of the ridge fingers, we came upon an abandoned hunting stand that looked like it could be used as a shelter. I was a little unnerved because we didn't really want to run into someone out there, especially if they weren't expecting company. As I was looking around, my friend went back behind me to look around or use the bathroom while I continued to look. I began to hear bipedal walking in the swamp below us, what sounded like sticks breaking and snapping. I was pretty freaked out, thinking it was a hunter, so I yelled down at it, saying, "Hello? Anyone there?" No response as I continued to look. I saw part of a dark figure go from tree to tree, long enough to know I wasn't imagining it, but not long enough to identify shape, size, and detail. My memory fails to remember exactly how tall off the ground it was, but the encounter lasted several seconds from when I first heard the walking, saw the dark flash, and when it subsequently disappeared or stopped in the swamp. After this, I rounded up my friend and we headed out of there pretty quickly, not knowing if a nearby hunter was there or worse, some crazy dude was stalking us. A few days went by before I really began to realize what I could have seen, and it just made little sense that someone was out there messing with us. Have since returned to the location to look some things over. Large game trails surround the dune, but other than that, not much further evidence was able to be found. Also noticed during the incident, do not recall anything else weird other than the bipedal walking and movement in the swamp. There was a weird smell in the air afterwards that almost reminded me of a musty grandma's attic, but I think that could have been from the shelter itself that was there. Other witnesses, his friend Cooper. Other stories, a Facebook friend that I met on a Pine Barrens group said she had something huge cross the road in front of her car in early morning hours while traveling on Route 206, but refuses to think it was a Bigfoot, even though other reports somewhat nearby have had the same thing happen. Time and conditions, it was sunny, a warm summer day. Incident took place at around early afternoon between 12 and 2. Unsure of the lighting conditions, but sun was just about overhead. The environment, as described above, the spot of the incident was on top of a large paleodune ridge, sandy upland areas, with thick swamp surrounding the area. The ridge itself had an undergrowth of low bush, blueberry, and huckleberries, with pitch pine trees spread out sparsely without about a 25% to 50% canopy coverage, so very open. Large cranberry bog nearby that has lots of prey items such as various frog species, deer, fox, snakes, and lots of edible vegetation. So the first story, they mention cranberry. uh, and cranberry bog. So I just thought that was interesting. You kind of have this connection there. Uh, I'll read the follow up and then I'll give my thoughts as usual. So this is another one done by Eric Spinner from the BFRO. He says, I spoke with Jacob by phone for nearly an hour. He retold the events of that day without embellishing any details. He was able to provide me some additional details. Jacob and his friend Cooper were volunteers doing research on snake habitat and various plants for the state of New Jersey. He chose that location based on a Google Earth search and felt it would yield results. After a long, tedious hike into the area through swamp and briars, they came to the Paleo Dune location. Upon arriving, they noticed a structure made of wood built into the trees above, and Jacob thought it may be someone's shelter and felt uneasy at the thought that they may be intruding on private property. The thought that someone may come out with a chainsaw crossed his mind. They proceeded to search for snakes under logs and brush, and then Cooper went to relieve himself. That was when Jacob heard bipedal footfalls coming from the swamp below. He also heard some branch snaps, and thinking that it may be a hunter, he called out saying, "Hello, anyone there?" No response, but that was when he saw the dark-colored upright figure, about 6.5 feet tall, move from right to left between two trees. He also mentioned the hair had a sheen to it. He observed it for about 6 seconds, but said it felt like much longer. Cooper returned, and Jacob expressed his concerns, and they hastily made their retreat from the area. After speaking with Jacob, he sent me the GPS coordinates, and I headed out to the location. I arrived by mid-afternoon and hiked into the area. The location is in the Pine Barrens, a region of New Jersey rich in flora and fauna unique to New Jersey. I trudged through swamps and around mud holes and found tracks of canine, turkey, and deer. I also noticed 2 makeshift blinds that could potentially be used as an ambush spot for hunting. I found the witness to be credible. This incident seems like a credible Class B encounter in every way. So this is another interesting one. He sees something. It's not a great look, but again, this isn't someone out there looking for Bigfoot. He sees something bipedal. He hears bipedal walking. And again, the first thought is not Bigfoot. Is this another hunter? Is this a piney? Someone who lives out in the Pine Barrens and maybe can be territorial and maybe not a chainsaw, but maybe has a shotgun or other firearm and might shoot first and ask questions later. You just don't know what you're going to run into out there. And even when Josh and I go camping, we're more worried about other people than the wildlife. Wildlife just does what it does. It's fairly predictable. People are not. So you just don't know what people are going to do out there. But it sounds like he saw something dark and hairy and I mean, 6.5 feet tall. It could have been a person. Could have been someone trying to scare them. If it was someone trying to scare them, it was probably the person who owned the shelter or lived out there or hunted out there. I don't think this was a hoaxer. Someone who was purposely saying, I'm going to go out and pretend to be Bigfoot today and scare whoever comes out, because it just seems like a lot of work, a long hike, not an easy hike to get there, and to just sit in a Bigfoot suit all day waiting to see if maybe somebody comes out and then maybe you'll scare them and hopefully they don't shoot me. Just doesn't really add up. So this one's a little bit more ambiguous because you didn't get a great look at it. But I do think it was interesting anyway, because you have these guys who, again, are not out there looking for Bigfoot. And their first immediate thought is not Bigfoot. I mean, some of the stories on this site, people just immediately, they see something or they hear a wood knock and, oh, there was Bigfoot. I like the stories where the people, Bigfoot is kind of the last sort of explanation they come up with instead of the first. When they kind of run through, well, could this have been a hunter? Could this have been, a weird guy in the woods? Could this have been an animal that we just, didn't get a good look at it? And then they kind of, once they eliminate all those possibilities, they say maybe it was Bigfoot. Those are the stories I love. So again, not as a clear sighting as the first story, but still, I think this is a really cool story. So we will move on. So story number 3 is another Class B. This was submitted by Mike McAuliffe, and it's titled "Camper Has Nighttime Intimidation Encounter in the Pine Barrens." So again, Pine Barrens, it's just a creepy place. And this sighting or encounter took place on May 18th of 2013. Burlington County, New Jersey. Nearest town is Wading Pines. Nearest road is Godfrey's Bridge Road. And I will get into the narrative here. Observed. I was camping one week, and I went for a hike, say around 12 a.m., about 3 miles from my campsite. I had heard some rustling around me and continued walking. I then heard what sounded to be a large animal about 15 yards away, but it sounded like it was moving on 2 legs, not 4. I had shone my light all around and did not see anything. No glowing eyes like a deer, fox, or a raccoon. At that point, I turned around and started to head back for my camp. Then I heard walking again. I started to walk faster. Out where no one is around for miles and sounds like someone is near, it can scare you. The people I was with would not have followed me like that because they knew I had my knife and my flare gun with a 22 subcaliber fitting with me. A tree branch had then landed next to me. It was fairly large with no other branches on it, so it did not fall from a tree. I turned and fired the gun. Something ran away with a very large thud sound as it ran. It sounded like a very, very overweight person running, but it was very fast. I never believed that a Bigfoot or anything like that was in this area. I've tried to explain it as something else, but can't find anything native to the area that could sound like that running. Other witnesses. He was alone. If I told anyone, they would just call me crazy. Time and conditions, 12 a.m., very dark. I had a headlamp and a very bright flashlight. The environment, pine forest, rivers around. Again, follow-up investigation by Eric Spinner. I'm good friends with Eric here. Spoke to the witness by phone, and he was able to reveal further details. He was taking a hike into the woods to set snares to catch food. He was hiking off trail near a small creek when he heard the rustling noises coming from roughly 50 feet away. He tried to shine his light to see what was making them, but was unable to make out anything. When he lowered his beam, he could see a shadow approximately 6.5 feet tall behind a tree swaying back and forth. But when he shined the flashlight, he couldn't see anything. At this point, he felt very uneasy and turned around and headed back towards camp. He could hear what sounded like bipedal footsteps paralleling him, but could not see what was making them. Then he heard a loud cracking sound and a large branch landed in front of him. Mike turned and fired his flare gun once, pointed down at the ground as a warning. Whatever it was took off and ran away, crashing through the bush and trees. He recalls it sounding like an overweight person running, but with very long strides. Mike quickly returned to camp and found the others in his party asleep. He didn't tell anyone of his experience for fear of ridicule. Mike is an avid outdoorsman and a hunter and has lots of experience in the woods. He is familiar with the sounds of the native animals and can't imagine what could have made those sounds. He was not out there actively searching for Bigfoot and had never given much prior thought to the subject. Following this incident, he did see a few shows on the subject on TV. It was after watching an episode of Finding Bigfoot on Animal Planet that he made a connection with an incident that was investigated and decided to file a report to our database. Having spoken to him, I find him to be credible. I know several others, including myself, who have had similar experiences in this particular area that led me to believe that what he is saying is plausible. So, again, I like this one. Very interesting. He gets paralleled. He's hearing bipedal footsteps. And again, people who've been in the woods, if you hear a bear or a deer, it doesn't sound like a person walking. So when you hear something on two legs, again, your first thought is usually a person, and it sounds like that was his. He's thinking like, would my friends kind of sneak up on me out here? What a stranger. I mean, it's a weird thing to do in the dark. Most people who go out camping are armed in some way, whether they have a firearm, a pistol, a rifle, a knife. People are going to be armed, mainly to protect themselves from animals, but also other people. So it's kind of foolhardy to approach a person in the woods, especially at night, especially not to like yell out and say, hey, don't be afraid. Like, I'm here. I'm a hunter. I'm a camper. I don't want to spook you. Don't turn around and shoot me. They try to let you know they're coming. So again, he doesn't really see much. He sees a shadow. But I thought that's interesting. The branch landing next to him, you hear that a lot. Like these things, things get thrown at you, whether it's rocks or sticks or large branches. Very strange. And again, we have someone who's an avid outdoorsman. This is not somebody who's like camping for the first time and just gets spooked by the sounds of the woods. This is someone who's been out there a lot. I mean, to just go hiking at midnight is a difficult task. I mean, even with a flashlight and a headlamp, it's, the woods at night can get so dark, and people don't realize that you see, things in movies or on TV, and it's dark, but you can still see everything. And it's not like that in real life. When you go out into these really deep woods areas, you cannot, with no flashlight or anything, you can't see your hand in front of your face. It's just like this inky, you might as well just be, a mile under the ocean. It's just so dark. So it's spooky to go for a hike. So he's clearly experienced. He clearly knows what he's doing. He hears something. He hears the bipedal footsteps. It's paralleling him, which we hear in a lot of cases. Just the the footsteps following the person. And when you walk, it walks. And when you stop, it stops. But it's not exactly in sync with you. It's not this mirror image. It's similar. It sounds like it's following you. And when you stop, it takes like an extra step. So it's not an echo. It's not just the sound bouncing off the trees. It's almost like something is trying to mirror you, but can't exactly anticipate when you're going to stop or start again. So interesting just for the paralleling, I thought, and the branch being thrown. And again, they could have fallen out of a tree, but who knows? So interesting story. So I chose our next story because this is an actual experience from the researcher and follow-up investigator from the BFRO, Eric Spinner. And this is one of his experiences while he was researching, and I guess he submitted it to the database here, so we can read this. So it's just one of his experiences. We've heard his follow-up investigations, but this is his experience. So from March 18th of 2010, so the winter. Location details. This road leads home from the Pine Barrens. The location was near high-tension pole lines and nearby developments. He wants to keep the exact location details private. Nearest town is Medford. Nearest road is Route 206 again. So he says, I was returning from one of my research areas in the Pine Barrens with a friend of mine. We had spent a few hours out in the forest on this cold and damp night trying to elicit a response from a Sasquatch. We had zero activity, and due to the declining weather conditions, I decided to wrap it up for the night around 12:35 a.m. We packed up our gear and began to drive homeward. We had just crossed a main road entering back into civilization and were discussing music when something came charging out from the right side of the road. I was traveling at around 50 miles an hour and got on my brakes hard. Luckily, I had anti-lock brakes and avoided skidding and barely missed hitting the creature. My friend was holding a bottle of water between her legs, and when I braked, she slid forward and the water sprayed all over her. She said, "What was that?" And I replied, "Deer." And she said, "No, it wasn't." I then realized that what I had just seen was not a deer or a dog, bear, or human dressed in a costume. It had no muzzle, tail, or pointy ears, and the legs were thicker than mine. It ran hunched over and appeared to propel itself faster by pumping its arms. Just as it looked like it was about to be hit, it turned its upper body and looked at us with an expression of shock as if it knew it had messed up. It never broke stride and continued running across the road and into the woods across the street. I slowed my vehicle and made a U-turn, returning to the spot. I got out of my car and tried to listen to hear anything moving through the brush. I didn't hear anything, and I couldn't smell anything either. I checked for tracks alongside the road, but did not see any. Two other witnesses, including himself. Other stories, a woman had a similar experience as mine the following night. A year later, another woman had a road crossing there as well. This was about 1:10 a.m., dark, cold, and damp out, low light. It was near some high-tension pole lines and nearby developments, surrounded by woods, lakes, and streams. So the follow-up was done by BFRO investigator Caroline Curtis. And she says, Eric has already shared his sighting for TV on the South Jersey Sasquatch episode of Finding Bigfoot. Unfortunately, the producers edited out his interview and a recreation from the final show. BFRO director Matt Moneymaker tweeted him that night saying, "That sucks. There's only 44 minutes in a show, and not everything we film makes it into the episode." The encounter happened just as he reported above. Other points of interest Eric and I can add is that there was a dead deer in the center of the road, a short distance down from where the individual ran out from. The exact spot it came out of is a trail lined on both sides with chain link fence, and it leads into a development. It also runs parallel to high-tension electrical lines, which are thought to be routes many animals will use for ease of travel. As Eric mentioned above, it had a look of surprise when it was directly in front of his vehicle. Even hunched over, the individual was 2.5 to 3 feet above the hood of his car. The hair color was reddish blonde and roughly 3 to 4 inches in length, and was flowing with the speed it was moving. The hair did not appear to be matted down. No additional facial details, as this incident happened so fast. Eric did not see, as he said above, a muzzle, antler, tail, ears, etc. The legs were thicker than his, and its arms were moving back and forth as if to propel itself faster, so like a runner. There are a couple of reports from this area of an animal that matches his description. The friend who was his passenger that night saw the same thing as he did, and she too believes it was nothing other than a Sasquatch. The two of them had been out in the Pine Barrens together doing research for many years. So a few points of interest here. It's a nighttime road crossing, which again, Scott and I have talked about on the show a few times. It's a weird thing. I don't understand why these creatures seem to run out in front of cars at night. It's usually early in the morning. There's probably not a lot of cars out. So if it waited 10 seconds, the car would drive by and then it could run out and never be seen. But these things seem to just run out in front of cars, almost get hit. There are reports that some of them have gotten hit. So very strange. The other thing that caught my attention was he mentions that they were out doing research and like nothing was going on, zero activity. And then they're kind of driving home. They're not thinking about Bigfoot anymore. They're talking about music. And then they have this encounter. And when I was a paranormal investigator and we'd go ghost hunting, this happened to us a lot. We'd sit at a place and we'd try to do EVP sessions. We'd try talking to things. We would always try to say, like, sort of engage something to get a response, and we never did. And it was always like when we kind of got bored and we're like, it's 12:30, like, let's wrap this up soon. There's nothing here. And we'd start talking about work or what we're doing next weekend or just, anything but the paranormal. And that's when we'd start hearing stuff, footsteps or door knocks or voices, or just like things would happen when we weren't looking for ghosts. And I've said this numerous times. Like, I think the best way to go Bigfoot hunting is to not go Bigfoot hunting. And I know that sounds weird, but honestly, just go camping, go hiking, go for a hike in the woods, go camping. Don't be banging on trees with wood and do tree knocks, and don't go hooting and hollering and doing your Bigfoot calls. Don't go out there looking for Bigfoot. Just go out and enjoy nature. That's when these experiences seem to happen, when we're not looking for these things, when we're just being ourselves and just go out, set up a tent, make a campfire, cook some food, kick back, have some beers. That's when these things happen. Or just when you're hiking, just go hiking and you'll turn a bend and maybe you'll see something. I mean, not guaranteed, but all these people go looking for Bigfoot and never find it. But all these encounters you hear are from people not looking for Bigfoot. So I honestly think there's something to that. Like, the best way to hunt for Bigfoot is don't hunt for Bigfoot. Just go out and be a camper. Go camping, go hiking, and see what you see. You just never know. But so interesting encounter, another roadside encounter. He sees the expression on this thing's face, like it knew it fucked up, like, oh man, I'm gonna get hit by a car. And again, it just makes you wonder why these things do that. A deer, you can understand. I mean, the things, deer aren't very smart, but you're talking about allegedly an intelligent primate that can hide from us and live in the woods and escape detection for centuries, just runs out in front of oncoming headlights constantly. Weird, very weird. So let's move on. Okay, so this one's going to be our last story for the week. My voice is starting to go on me, and I think the episode is starting to get a little long here, so I'm just going to finish up with this story. This is another Class B, possible nighttime encounter in Wharton State Forest. I mentioned Wharton State Forest earlier. It's kind of in the southern part of Burlington County. This is from October of 1981, so in the fall. Location details edited out at the request of the witness. Nearest town is Tabernacle, New Jersey. Nearest road is Carranza Road. Observed. When I was 14, I was camping in Wharton State Forest north of Hampton Furnace. I was alone. Just before dark, I was out walking. I became aware that something was shadowing me back in the brush. It followed me to camp and began to circle. It was very stealthy. It circled while I cooked and got ready for the night. I finally crawled into the tent and tried to sleep. After a while, I heard a faint sound behind me. I was about to look out the back window when this thing started screaming. I've never heard anything that loud in the woods. The volume was like a car horn up close. People tell me it was an owl. Well, I have heard a lot of owls and they can't even come close. I lay there for a long time, too scared to move. I thought I heard it moving closer and I started screaming. It just stopped and walked off. After a very long night, I packed up at first light and got out of there. The area behind the tent was covered in pine needles and I had no desire to look in the brush for tracks. Also noticed, I once found human tracks in the mud in winter. They were no longer than 10 inches, but very broad at the time. I thought some nut was running around in winter in their bare feet. The tracks were very wide. No other witnesses, other stories. He's seen other stories on the website. Time and conditions from dusk to about 2 hours after dark. The environment, bog on one side, swamp on the other. So let me do the follow-up investigation and I'll give some thoughts. So this one doesn't say who the investigator was. Maybe it was Eric Spinner. But the investigator says, I spoke with the witness over the phone on April 3rd, 2006 for about an hour. I believe this person to be credible. He is an avid outdoorsman and knows his wildlife. He recalled the encounter in detail, even though it took place 25 years ago. The witness had camped out often by himself in this area of the Pine Barrens. On this day, he was returning back to his campsite when he noticed something had just crossed the dirt road in front of him at a distance of about 50 feet. He did not see what it was, but noticed the brush was moving where the animal had just entered from the opposite side of the road. He also heard what he described as a deep thumping sound. All the way back to his camp, something was paralleling and pacing him. It was very sly and would stop when he stopped, as if trying not to be heard. Again, he would hear the occasional thumping sounds. When he retired for the evening, something began to approach the back of his tent. The animal started to scream at a very loud level. He had never heard anything like it before or since. Some low mumbling growls and chatter followed the scream. So that's interesting. After hearing the animal approach the tent a second time, he became very frightened and started to scream back of it. Get out of here. Go away. Leave me alone. Immediately after screaming, the animal retreated. The witness stayed up the entire night listening intently, but never heard the animal again. He never saw what was making the noise. The next morning, he packed up his gear and left the area. He's been back to the area since and has come across human-like tracks in the mud. He estimated the tracks at about 10 inches long and 6 inches wide. The area has become heavily used since the time of this incident. He has not had another encounter since then. So a few things here. I mean, one, he was 14 and camping in the Pine Barrens by himself. So, and this was, back in 1981. Times were a little different back then. I don't think kids that young go camping by themselves anymore. Not very often anyway. But brave kid to be 14 years old and be out there by himself, in a tent, a little campfire, and just being by himself out there. So kudos to him for that. But he mentions shadowing me, so he doesn't use the terminology paralleling, but that's kind of what he was talking about, that this thing is paralleling him. And then approaching his tent. Sounds curious. It screams very loud. Again, I've heard owls too, and they can be loud, but they're not that loud. And you pretty much, after a few seconds, you kind of know what they are. They can startle you because the woods could be quiet for hours at night. And then all of a sudden, this thing just starts screaming. And, it's like, oh God, that's just an owl. So that can be scary, but again, this is someone who's been camping since he was very young. If he was camping by himself at 14, he was probably in the woods with adult family members prior to this, and is familiar with the woods and familiar with the sounds and familiar with the animals. So very weird. And then he yells and the thing runs, which sounds, to be honest, sounds like it could have been a bear. Bears do that. They'll come around and you just yell, hey bear, and they run off. The interesting part though is that it screamed at him first, like it approached the tent and then just let out this yell. Very strange. It wasn't an owl. He says it was like like the volume of a car horn, just being very close to a car horn, which can be very loud. Found human tracks in the mud in winter, and this just reminds me of a couple of weeks ago I did stories about Bigfoot in Sweden, and I had a listener named Axel who wrote to me, and he found a footprint in the mud, and he said it's cold. It's not the dead of winter, but he's like it's a remote area, and here's this like barefoot human footprint in the mud at a time of year when people really shouldn't be barefoot. And I've heard a lot of stories about this coming out of the Pine Barrens of just feet in the mud or the snow, bare feet, not the animal bear, just bare human feet, unshoed human feet, no shoes, no boots, just a bare foot in the mud or in the snow. Who would do that? It's just a weird thing, even if it's not Bigfoot, it's just who's out there walking around barefoot in the snow and in the mud. Enough where you're hearing it, where I'm hearing it at least many, many times. And then my listener, Axel from Sweden, found and photographed this footprint over in Sweden. So it's clearly not the same person. So what is it? Is it Bigfoot? I don't know. But this encounter is a little weird, a little spooky. Just because he was so young too. And anytime you're out there by yourself, it's worse when you're out there by yourself. When you're out there with people and you hear things or experience things, it's not cool. And to be by yourself at 14, I can't even imagine it. I'm 50 and I wouldn't want to go through what this kid went through. Also the low mumbling growls and chatter. Uh, you don't hear the chatter a lot, but it is present in some of these stories. The chatter, like the Ron Moorhead Sierra sounds, the samurai chatter, where it's people say it sounded like somebody speaking Russian, but it wasn't quite Russian, or they were speaking a different language. I can't tell you what the language was, but it sounded like two guys in the woods or just one guy in the woods just speaking a different language. I can't tell you what language it was. And some people guess that it's Russian or an Asian language of some sort, Chinese or Japanese, hence the samurai chatter moniker. So interesting. Again, bears don't do that. So what did he encounter out there? Jersey Devil, Bigfoot? Who knows? But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I love these stories. Again, some of them are a little better than others, but I love any and all stories because even the ones that you could possibly debunk as a bear or a misidentification, there's still that possibility that it's something unknown, that it is Bigfoot. And just that possibility is interesting to me. So, and again, I don't think any of these people are lying. I don't think people are going to take the time to write out these stories and meet with investigators or spend time on the phone with them. It just doesn't sound like hoaxers, and I don't get what the payoff would be. And I can't imagine there's that many mentally ill people out there who just enjoy doing this and wasting people's time for no payoff whatsoever. It's just kind of goes against human behavior. So who knows? But thought these were interesting stories. All right, everybody. So I hope you enjoyed these stories from New Jersey, down in the Pine Barrens, Burlington County. Olivia and Zach, I know you guys are down there. I didn't realize at the time that you guys were in Burlington. If I know, maybe last time we were at the Ren Fair, I would have seen if we could have hooked up with you guys or met up for dinner or something, but maybe next time. And, just the Ren Fair was cool. And like I said, anytime I'm in any place I've never been to before, I try to look up the local history if there's Bigfoot sightings or UFO sightings or lake monsters. And my go-to these days is really Bigfoot. So I was like, let me see if there's any Bigfoot sightings down there. And lo and behold, a lot from Burlington County. And again, because it is, covers part of the Pine Barrens, and the Pine Barrens just has a long history of high strangeness with the Jersey Devil and Bigfoot sightings and just all sorts of weird sounds in there. And the Pineys who live in there. I mean, even just the earthly stuff can be a little spooky. So just, I thought it was cool. Next week, everybody, the 100th episode, Brian Goslin, Beast of a Bear Road, Bigfoot in Whitehall, New York. Brian was such a cool guest, and we were just talking for almost 2 hours, and, I almost hated to cut the show at that point. We could have talked all night, and he's just such a fascinating guy to listen to, an amazing storyteller, and just so down to earth, and just a very special episode. So I'm very happy that it kind of worked out, the timing, to meet up with Brian and do the episode with him, and it just kind of falls at our 100th episode next week. So that's going to be awesome. So check into that, everybody. In the meantime, question everything. We always have to question things, and even with these stories, like I said, you have to question, are these people possibly lying? It's a possibility. I don't believe it in most of these cases. I don't believe people are lying about it. Can it be misidentifications? Of course. That doesn't mean I don't believe in Bigfoot. It doesn't mean I absolutely 100% believe this was a bear or this was a hunter or this was whatever. It's just, we look at all possibilities here. We question everything. I leave it up to you guys. I just kind of present the stories. I give you my thoughts, and I love hearing your thoughts. Again, be respectful, but share your thoughts down below. What you guys think of these stories? Do you think these people really saw Bigfoot? Was it a bear? Was it another misidentified animal? But some of these stories, it's hard to write them off. It's either they're lying or they saw Bigfoot. There's no in between. There's no 1.5. It's A or B. There's nothing in between A and B. It's just either they saw Bigfoot or they're lying. So very cool. If you guys have stories you want to share, jason@oddanduntold.com. Shoot me an email. You can come on the show. You can just write out your experience and I can read it on the air, or you can just share your experience with me and say, hey, Jay, please keep this between us and don't share it. And I never will. I've had a lot of people send me stories about a variety of things, not just Bigfoot, but UFOs and ghosts and lake monsters. And they've all said, not all of them, but a lot of them have said, I don't want to come on the air. I don't want you sharing this. This is just, I just wanted to let you know that this is what I saw. So I appreciate those stories as well. So yeah, question everything, everybody. And until next time, rock and roll.